What do you do when you see a measure like this in your music? Or this? Well, if your answer is skip to the next measure and come back later, this video is for you. I have learned tons of measures just like this. So next time you come across a terrifying looking measure like this, follow these steps and see where it takes you. Now, step number 1 is breathe. Relax a little, clear your head before starting the measure. Don't just jump in day 1 and spend 2 hours fumbling over a bunch of wrong notes. 99 times out of 100, there's a pattern here. There are groupings to the notes. Simply slow your pacing down a little bit intentionally. Like maybe you're playing a piece that's pretty easy for you. You're just burning through one measure after another. Then you come across a measure like this and you kind of expect, okay, I'll just learn this one in 30 seconds, 60 seconds too. No, just relax. Realize you're going to find a pattern if you look for it, and just look for those patterns. Look for understanding before you dive into all the notes. Okay, now that you're taking a deep breath, you're ready for step number 2. And step number 2 makes a lot of sense. It is now time to figure out what the pattern is. Here's our example from Liszt Tarantella. What I'm not going to do is just try to speed this up, reading one note at a time and trying to read every single letter name the whole time. I'm just going to take a second and say, okay, there's got to be a pattern here somewhere. Maybe I'll just play the top right-hand note. There's 2 right-hand notes at a time, but I'm just going to play the top one. So I have A flat, G, F sharp. Okay. Oh, C flat, B flat, A. Okay. D, C sharp, C natural. I'm already seeing kind of a pattern. Whatever note I start on, I fall 2 half steps below that. So there's pattern number 1. Whatever my start note was, then I continue to the very next note is going to be a half step lower, and the very next note is going to be a half step lower. Now you could stop right there, but I would say what a lot of us advanced piano players do is we then try to look for more patterns. Like for example, I said you play a note and you go down 2 half steps, play another note, 2 half steps. But what is the first note of each group? Well, I have an A flat, I have a C flat, I have a D, and I have an F. Then I have an A flat, then I have a C flat. I can't reach all this because it's way over there. But what is that? Well, if you know what a fully diminished 7th chord is, it's just a fully diminished 7th chord. If you don't know what it is, you can simply think of it as minor thirds. I start on A flat, I go minor third higher, 3 half steps, minor third higher, minor third higher, minor third higher. Well, check out that pattern. If I know that pattern, every 3 notes, that's the start of each 3-note group. But then I do the half step falling. I'm already figuring out this pattern, memorizing it too. I got this. Every starting note is 3 notes higher than the last starting note. And now I'm going to figure out what the other right-hand note's doing. So I have D and A flat. Okay, then F and B, F and C flat. And then D and A flat. Okay, so the first 2 notes are this, then this, then this, then this. I've seen another pattern. The starting 2 notes are always the same distance apart. They're always a tritone, diminished 5th, augmented 4th, whatever you want to call them. Or you can think of them as part of this fully diminished 7th chord. Now, if you don't know the chords and you're thinking this whole method won't work for me because I don't know what chord you're talking about, you actually don't have to. You could just think about it as go 3 half steps up, 3 half steps up, 3 half steps up. So that's kind of the point. Actually, when I was younger, before I knew lots of chords pretty young, but you don't always discover the patterns until you learn some deeper theory. Sometimes I didn't even understand the deeper theory, but I could still derive a pattern out of what I was doing. Now, I want to take a quick break because I feel like right now some of you are thinking, well, Ryan, you handpicked this passage because it's one that has a pattern. And yeah, I did pick this passage because it is one that looks terrifying, that the pattern's actually pretty simple. The pattern is, it's still hard to play, but the pattern's simple. However, well over 90% of these flourishes you see, and think of Chopin, think of Liszt, even Beethoven, like impressive passages, well over 90%. I'd say even close to like 97, 98% of them have a clear pattern. So these patterns are everywhere. It's just a matter of learning to look for them. Okay, so you've done step 1, take a deep breath, realize that you should practice this very smart and intentionally. Step 2, you have now found your pattern. Step 3, find a good fingering for your pattern. Once in a while, people see a pattern like this. They understand what it is really quickly, but they have just random fingering. They just like dive into the passage and they just kind of do, you know, whatever works because they can see all the notes. They know all the notes already because the pattern's so obvious, but they never take a second to solidify fingering. Now, I've talked about fingering before. I don't think you should start a piece out and 100% decide on a definite fingering that you will do for the rest of your life for passages like this. I think you need to give yourself an experimentation time where you're intentionally trying out different things, seeing what works. But at a certain point, you need to kind of decide, especially if something is so patterned, what fingering you want to do and make sure it makes sense. Make sure there's not a better option out there. But then once you decide on something, do it. So this is a great example because really the best fingering for this right hand run is 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, over and over and over again. If you're doing something like 4, 3, 2, 5, 2, thumb, 4, 2, 3, 2, you're really just overcomplicating your life, especially in these pattern parts. You need to make sure you have a good fingering that makes a lot of sense. That's, you know, in this case, you're doing the same thing over and over again, 3-note sequence over and over again. It all works with 4-1, 4-1, 4-1, so you can just do 4-1. I'm going to show you another example in a little bit here that has a more complicated solution to the fingering, but for this one, it's pretty simple. Step number 4, now that you have your notes, you have the fingers you want to use, make sure you're going slow and understanding the pattern. If you feel like you're playing something like this and you're barely hanging on for dear life, just like, and you can tell your mind is not staying up on the pattern, you're not staying ahead of it, you're not doing it right. You need to go slow enough so that you can think in your head. 3 notes down, up a third, notes down, up a third, 3 notes down, up a third, 3 notes down, up a third. Like, you should be able to process all that while you're playing. Then when you speed it up, just make sure your brain is able to keep up with your fingers, and the pattern won't really get any harder. You'll already kind of know how to do it, and you'll know where you're at. You're not just going to let your fingers run ahead of you. And step number 5, and this one might be a little controversial for some people, but I think it makes a lot of sense in this kind of passage, and that's memorize it. Like, this is going to be fast, flashy. Your fingers are going to be really quickly. You're going to want to be able to look down at your fingers when you're playing, and it's so patterned. Like, you should not be trying to memorize every note. Don't play this pattern and you go, okay, I have to memorize C flat, F, A flat, D, going to B flat, and G, going to... Don't do that. You're just memorizing the pattern. That one. You're going to memorize that pattern somewhat early on in the process. Like, as you start speeding it up, you want to make sure you really know that. So you're not, again, bogged down by looking at music. I honestly don't really even... I don't want to say I don't process the notes. I do when I'm reading this, but it's just a pattern. You don't have to think about every single last detail. But one really important point I want to make to memorizing this is definitely completely know where you're starting, how you're starting, and where you're ending. Because you can definitely get lost in something like this, just going, and is that the last one? Or do I do more? How many do I do? So I would take time to say, actually really early on, I would take time to say, okay, I'm starting on the A flat, right here. I wouldn't count how many I have. I guess I could. There's 5, 6, 7. But more importantly, I'm going to get to that F. Then after I play this F, I work my way back down to there. So really, I'm starting from A flat, and I'm going up to this F. Well, that's all I have to memorize. If I know the pattern, start there, and then I obviously have to memorize the second half where I work my way back down too. Now that you know the 5-step sequence, we're going to practice applying it together to a different passage from the same piece. Step 1, breathe. Don't do this. Step number 2, we're going to look for the patterns or the groups. Group number 1 is pretty easy. You can do this. That's all right there within one handful. Check this out. You're going to do this. That's just a chromatic scale. Then the last one's actually kind of cool because it looks like just a bunch of skips, like, but actually it's one chord, and actually it ends on G right there, which is funny, right? Because we had the G up here, G, 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 and then it's over on the F there. Okay, now before I drill it too much though, we need to get to step 3, which is, say it with me, fingering. Like if you do this and put your thumb on that G, that feels great. But then you're stuck with this. Again, the goal fingering is for several days or maybe even a couple of weeks. Have a few candidate fingerings, a few experiments, like this one, and then decide on one as time goes on and really, really stick with it. And then if you realize in like 2 months you made a horrible decision with fingering, you are totally allowed to switch, but you want to be consistent so you're actually switching, not just playing random fingers on random notes. Okay, step 4. I kind of cheated and already did a little step 4 for you, right? It's just play slowly, focus on understanding. I'm not just going. If I can kind of give you like a little aside, that's like one of the #1 mistakes I see students do, is they play something like this and they go. They would be way better off going. Thinking ahead, I know that. Going to the C, chromatic. There's a skip here, down the scale, chord, I should say, then up to F. They'd be way better off doing that than going freeze up, yes, chromatic, yeah. You're going too fast if you're doing that. Slow it back down so you can process while you're playing. And finally, if you haven't already done it through playing the first 4 steps, take a little bit of time and try to memorize it a little bit. Not saying you have to play without your music. You can use your music long term. You're not sitting here trying to memorize D flat, D flat, E flat, D flat, C, D flat, jump to C. No, you're not trying to memorize it every detail. You just have the groups. You memorize this group. I hope this video was super helpful and you feel a lot more confident next time you see something terrifying like this in one of your pieces. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.